gun!
For most of the 1700s, the Royal Navy had a killer in the fleet. It didn't wear an enemy uniform. It didn't need gunpowder. It was invisible, measurable, and completely misunderstood. It killed more British sailors than the French Navy ever did, and it had a technical name: insufficient metacentric height. In plain English, that meant the ship couldn't stand up. The symptom was called crank. A crank ship heeled too easily under sail. Catch a moderate breeze, and she'd lean over so far that her lower gun ports dipped toward the waterline. Those ports held the heaviest weapons in the fleet, 32-pound cannons that could punch through oak at half a mile. But if you couldn't open the ports without flooding the gun deck, those weapons became ornaments. HMS Cumberland, launched in 1710, spent 40 years being rebuilt, widened, and eventually cut down to half her original firepower. She was a monument to a problem the Navy couldn't solve because the math didn't exist yet. This is the story of how ships stay upright, what happens when the invisible physics fails, and how two mathematicians finally gave naval architects the numbers they needed to stop building floating coffins. Every floating ship is fighting a war between two invisible points. The first is the center of gravity, where all the ship's weight concentrates. Guns mounted high, mass reaching skyward, men working the upper yards. All that mass pulls downward through one mathematical point. The second is the center of buoyancy, the geometric middle of the underwater hull. That's where the ocean pushes back up. When those 2 points line up vertically, the ship sits level. But the moment wind hits the sails, the ship heels. And here's where the physics gets interesting. As the ship tilts, the underwater shape changes. One side goes deeper, the other lifts out of the water. The center of buoyancy shifts outboard toward the low side. If it moves far enough, it creates a lever. The ocean is now pushing up off-center from where gravity pulls down. That sideways push is the righting moment. It's what stands the ship back up. Here's a way to understand this in physical terms. Stand up and balance a broomstick vertically on your palm. That's relatively easy. Now try to balance it horizontally on one finger. Impossible, right? Same stick, same weight, but the distribution changed everything. A ship works the same way. Take HMS Torbay, launched in 1693. Empty, sitting in dock, she was stable enough. Load her with provisions, water casks stowed low in the hold, still manageable. But then you start loading the gun deck. 70 tons of iron cannon, another 40 tons of shot and powder. Then the crew climbs aboard. I saw on board 100 men working the upper yards at any given time. Every addition shifts that invisible point higher. The shipwrights knew this created risk, but they didn't have a formula to calculate it. They'd launch a ship, load it completely, and then wait to see if it felt right. If it didn't, they'd start the expensive process over. But there's a limit to how far a ship can heel safely. If the center of gravity is too high, that lever arm stays small. The ship rolls easily and recovers slowly. Sailors could feel it in the motion of the deck. A crank ship had a lazy, sickening roll. She'd lean into a wave and hang there, as if considering whether to come back up. The opposite condition was also dangerous. Pack too much weight low in the hull, and the ship becomes what sailors called stiff. She snaps back upright so violently that she can roll the masts out of their sockets. The ideal was somewhere in the middle, a zone where the ship had enough stability to stand up to wind pressure, but enough give to ride a swell without tearing herself apart. For most of the 17th century, finding that zone was pure guesswork. Shipwrights built by eye and precedent. If a design worked, you copied it. If it failed, you rebuilt it wider and hoped for better results. Then in 1746, a French mathematician named Pierre Bouguer published a treatise that changed naval architecture forever. He defined something called the metacenter, a theoretical point above the center of buoyancy. The key insight was simple but revolutionary. If your center of gravity sat below the metacenter, you were stable. If it sat above, you were in danger. For the first time in history, stability had a quantifiable measure. Shipbuilders could calculate it before the keel was laid. 20 years later, a Swedish architect named Frederick F. Chapman took the mathematics further. He proved that the curve of a ship's hull could follow a geometric rule, specifically a parabola. Instead of carving wooden models and scaling them up, a process prone to cumulative errors, you could draw the mathematically perfect hull with drafting tools. Stability became predictable, but theory doesn't help if you're already at sea in a crankship. And Cumberland wasn't the only vessel struggling with this invisible problem. The solution came in two parts. First, iron ballast. Before the mid-1700s, most ships used what was called shingle, essentially river stones and gravel piled in the hold. It worked for basic flotation, but stone has relatively low density. To get sufficient weight, you needed a thick layer of it, which raised the overall center of gravity. Iron changed the fundamental equation. Pig iron bars cast in 3-foot lengths and stamped with the King's mark were almost 4 times denser than stone. You could stow the same weight in a much thinner layer, positioned right against the keel. That single change dropped the center of gravity and increased the metacentric height significantly. But the impact went beyond just stability numbers. The switch to iron ballast changed what the Navy could operationally accomplish. A ship ballasted with stone needed roughly 8 feet of shingle in the hold. That's vertical space you can't use for anything else. It meant shorter deployment ranges because you couldn't carry enough water and provisions. A typical stone-ballasted 74 could stay at sea for about 6 weeks before running critically low on drinking water. Iron ballast was different. Same stabilizing weight, but packed into 18 inches of vertical space against the keel. Now you could stack water casks 3 barrels high in the same hold. Food storage capacity nearly doubled. Operational range went from 6 weeks to 14 weeks without resupply. That's the difference between patrolling the English Channel and maintaining a blockade across the entire French Atlantic coast. Stone ballast was a physics solution. Iron ballast became a strategic weapon. The French figured this out first, which is why British admirals were writing increasingly frustrated letters in the 1740s about enemy ships that could outsail us and outstay us on station. The second part of the solution was better hull geometry. The French led the way with the 74-gun ship, a 2-deck design with a longer hull and wider beam than the old 80-gun 3-deckers. When the British captured a French 74 in 1747, naval constructors reverse-engineered it immediately. The design became the backbone of the battle fleet because it solved the crank problem. You could fight your lower guns in weather that would force a 3-decker to keep her ports closed. Here's what people consistently get wrong about ship stability. They assume it's about total weight. Heavy ships sink faster, correct? No, stability is about distribution of mass, not the total amount. A ship loaded with iron ballast low in the hull is far harder to capsize than a lighter ship with all its weight concentrated high. The Vasa, the Swedish warship that capsized in 1628, wasn't particularly heavy for her size. She went over because her center of gravity was positioned too high. Mass-placed low saves lives. Mass-placed high kills. Another persistent misconception: you can always close the gun ports in time. In theory, yes. In practice, you're asking exhausted men on a tilting deck to haul 3-ton cannons inboard using block and tackle, bar the port lids, and make everything watertight while the ship is actively heeling in a squall. The ports can submerge in seconds. By the time you realize you need to secure them, you've often already crossed the point of no return. And here's perhaps the most dangerous assumption: that stability is a fixed ship property. It's not. Every time you move weight, you change the entire equation. Fire off a full broadside and the recoil shifts tons of iron. Pump water from the bilge, and you alter the center of gravity. Take on cargo, strike the topmast, shift ballast to correct a list. Every action recalculates the numbers. The margin for error was terrifyingly narrow. On a typical 74-gun ship, the lower gunport sills sat approximately 5 to 6 feet above the waterline when properly loaded. The beam measured roughly 46 feet. Do the basic trigonometry, and you realize that a heel angle of just 15 to 20 degrees puts those port sills underwater. 15 degrees doesn't feel extreme. It's the angle of a standard wheelchair ramp. But if those ports are open and the ship crosses that geometric line, ocean water begins pouring onto the gun deck. And that's when the physics turns lethal. Water on an open deck is what engineers call a free surface. It's not confined in a sealed tank. It can slosh freely to the low side, and when it does, it pulls the ship's center of gravity outboard with it. The mathematics of this effect are brutal. The destabilizing moment is proportional to the cube of the deck's width. Let me show you how rapidly this develops. A 74 has a lower gun deck, approximately 50 feet wide. If a single gun port admits water, just one compromise opening, water pours in at roughly 2 tons per minute. That water spreads across the full width of the deck. It's not contained, it's loose. When the ship attempts to roll back upright, that water rushes to the opposite side. 2 tons of liquid weight racing across 50 feet of open deck. The center of gravity shifts outboard by about 4 feet in under 3 seconds. Your metacentric height just collapsed from 4 feet to effectively 0. The crew can physically feel this change. Suddenly, the ship isn't fighting to stand up anymore. She's hanging at the angle of heel. That's the moment experienced sailors understood they were in mortal danger, because in approximately 20 more seconds, you'll have 3 open gun ports underwater instead of 1, 6 tons per minute flooding in. The mathematics doesn't improve from there. It becomes exponential. A thin stream of water in a narrow bilge barely affects stability. The same volume of water spread across a 50-foot wide gun deck can collapse your stability envelope in under a minute. This is why downflooding through gun ports was catastrophic in a way that ordinary leaks were not. The ship that would teach the Royal Navy this lesson in the most brutal terms possible was HMS Royal George. But that investigation belongs in another file. So what's the practical takeaway? If you're designing a ship, building one, or trying to understand why certain vessels survived while others didn't, here's the working checklist. First, know your metacentric height. It's the vertical distance between your center of gravity and your metacenter. Too low and you're crank. Too high and you're stiff. For a ship of the line, the functional sweet spot was approximately 3 to 5 feet. That provided enough stability to stand up to wind pressure and enough roll period to aim and fire guns accurately. Second, understand that ballast is not just dead weight. It's a precisely engineered component. The transition from stone to iron wasn't primarily about saving hold space, though that helped enormously. It was about lowering the center of gravity enough to buy you survivable stability margins. Third, watch the free surface religiously. Water on an open deck is a stability destroyer. The wider the deck, the more catastrophic the effect. This is why downflooding through open gun ports was so immediately fatal. You weren't just adding weight to the ship, you were creating a sloshing mass that could shift your center of gravity past the geometric point of recovery. Fourth, know your downflooding angle. For most ships of the line, it was somewhere between 15 and 20 degrees of heel. Beyond that angle, with ports open, you weren't coming back. That number wasn't negotiable. It was determined by basic geometry and the laws of physics. And finally, remember that stability is never static. Every operational decision changes the equation. Jettison upper deck guns to lighten the high weight. Shift ballast to correct a developing list. Strike the topmast during a gale. These weren't naval traditions passed down for ceremony. They were survival tactics based on physics that most sailors couldn't calculate mathematically, but could feel in the motion of the deck beneath their feet. The age of guesswork ended with Bouguer and Chapman. By 1800, naval architects had the mathematical tools to predict whether a design would stand up or go over before it ever touched water. But the fundamental physics didn't change. Gravity and buoyancy are still fighting the same war, governed by the same immutable rules. Cumberland, Torbay, and dozens of other crankships paid the tuition for that learning curve. They were the expensive test cases, the failures that taught the Navy how to build ships that could actually fight in the conditions where battles were won or lost. Now that you understand the invisible war between gravity and buoyancy, you're ready to see what happens when the math goes wrong. In our next file, we open the case of the HMS Royal George, a first-rate ship of the line that ignored the rules of the Metacenter and paid the ultimate price, sinking at anchor in minutes. Click here to watch the Royal George disaster.